the most out of it. So welcome to our second quarter call, and it's going to be called Embracing Equity. And if you didn't bring it, if you could grab a notebook and an ink pen, and then if you happen to have two colored pencils, or like I grabbed highlighters, that would be great. You can see my messy house behind me now, which is okay. As normal, if you could please mute your phone or your computer, that way we won't have any background noise. I would really appreciate that. Also, if you haven't, come join us over on LinkedIn. We do have a child support training partnership page, and we do post there weekly. So if you are a member, I would have posted this week and last week that we have our call today. And so you can come on over, you can invite connections to the group. So please come follow us on LinkedIn. And then this recording, as well as all of the materials, will be located on our Child Support Training Partnership website on Iowa State University under the Child Welfare Research and Training Project. I will be sending an email with the link to the recording or to the website so that you can come review the recording. After this is done, you're welcome to share it with your colleagues as well. And also, Mary Ann will be sending me a PDF version of her presentation today after we've completed our training today. Also, we do send quarterly newsletters, so you can access our quarterly newsletter there. And I have over here where you can see our archive. We have winter 2020 on down to January of 2019. Last but not least, I want to welcome you to join us in August, on August 13th, for our next CSTP call. So mark those calendars, block those off. We will be dead in the center of the great Iowa State Fair. So if you guys are familiar with the State Fair musical, it's about our Iowa State Fair, best in the land. So we look forward to seeing you on August 13th, halfway through the State Fair. As you can tell, I love the fair. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary Ann Rosen. She is the Policy Initiatives Advisor. I've had a great time getting to know Mary Ann through preparing for this, and I think you guys are going to love her presentation. She is the executive for the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families, and she'll be presenting Embracing Equity. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass it on over to Mary Ann.
Thank you so much, Sean. And I hope right now you are all able to see the welcome screen.
It hasn't quite popped up yet.
All right, hold on. Not sure. Let me just go back here. Let me minimize this. Hold on. Share. Hold on. Let's try it again. Okay, do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Now, Sean, I am actually going to be asking for your assistance as I move through the PowerPoint today. And I believe that the little screen up here that says share and mute and all that, that's going to disappear momentarily. There you go. But Sean, one thing that I cannot see as I present is I don't have access to the chat. Okay. So if you could kindly help me whenever I refer to the chat by calling out answers that appear in the chat, that would be wonderful.
You bet.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so grateful to Sean Peterson. It's been, as she said, just an absolute joy, not only getting to work with her, but also getting to know her as a new friend. And I'm so excited to present this training session today. This is going to be a journey to becoming more conscious, and I'm so excited to walk together as we move forward to create a more equitable, inclusive, and diverse world. Today's training is the first of a three-part training created by members of the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families Equity and Inclusion Curriculum Development Committee. Our training today is Embracing Equity. Sean did send an email containing some pre-work for our session this afternoon. The email indicated that for today's training, you'd need a notebook, and we're going to call this our equity journal, a pen, and 2 colored pencils of different colors. You also saw in the email that there were 3 short video clips to watch and an activity related to core values to complete before our training today. So I hope you had a chance to watch all 3 videos and complete the core values training. As we move through today's session, please feel free to share your reactions to those videos and to the values activity when we get to those later on during the session. You may be wondering why I'm facilitating professional development training on equity and inclusion. One important answer is that activity generates change. As Kuwaiti American author and spiritual teacher A.H. Almas has observed, to reach others, we have to first know ourselves. And to contact the deeper truth of who we are, we must engage in some activity or practice that questions what we assume to be true about ourselves. The goals of today's training are to understand the connections values have to identity and equity, acknowledge the impact of bias on equity, and explore strategies for disrupting bias and promoting equity. During the time we have together today, you can expect to establish community agreements to create trust in our space, explore identity as it relates to yourself and how you see others, engage in potentially difficult conversations, practice self-care, learn what it means to be an ally, and create a personal action plan. So you might be wondering who I am. I know Sean provided a bit of an introduction, but those of us from Wisconsin's Equity and Inclusion Curriculum Development Committee who created and teach this curriculum are professionally trained facilitators who work in various divisions and bureaus within Wisconsin's Department of Children and Families. My name, as Sean mentioned, is Mary Ann Rosen. I work for the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families Division of Family and Economic Security, which houses the Bureau of Child Support, the Bureau of Working Families, and the Bureau of Refugee Programs. I serve as the division's Policy Initiatives Advisor. And I am the current Vice Chair of the department's Equity and Inclusion Advisory Committee. Now I'd like to get to know you, and this is where, Sean, I'm going to need a little bit of assistance with regard to the chat. So in the chat, please type your name, your title and place of work, and one word that describes how you're feeling right now about taking this training. Go ahead and enter that information. And Sean, if you could kindly read out loud some of the one-word responses. Oh, I do see. Wait a minute. I see excited.
Awesome. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I don't know how I'm able to see that. I did see one that said excited. Open.
Yeah.
Oh, I do see it. Oh, that's great, guys. Thank you so much. Excited, ready. Wow, enthusiastic. I'm so
Intrigued.
excited, you guys. Intrigued.
Interested.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah, somebody said open. I don't know if you heard that one. Curious.
Oh, wonderful.
This is great, you guys. Thank you.
Curious.
Curious again,
Oh my
open.
gosh. Well, thank you so much, guys. Continue putting your responses in. And I'm just so honored to be presenting. I love that We're all feeling excited, curious, interested, happy to be here. That's just so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Fascinated.
So let's
I didn't
turn.
know if you saw that one, Marianne.
Oh no, that
Like
is
information.
great.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so wonderful. So let's turn to some community agreements. Community agreements will help us establish a foundation for doing equity work and having respectful, productive discussions. So today, I ask that you speak for yourself. I ask that you share airtime so that everyone has an equal opportunity to speak. Now, granted, with a group this size, we will not have time or space for everyone to speak. But in other words, we want to make sure that we don't monopolize the chat or when we open our mics, the time. Please refrain from using sweeping generalizations. For example, resist the urge to say things like all men are. Rather, speak from your own experience. Listen for understanding and not to respond or judge. Listen to receive what you are hearing. And finally, acknowledge that there is really no closure to equity work. This is a journey, not a destination. I'm sure that we're going to be doing work like this for decades to come. There will be no final product. There is only continuous learning and growth. Remember, during our time together, it's okay to feel uncomfortable. Try to lean into that discomfort. It's also okay to agree to disagree, as long as we abide by the community agreements. And also, please know it's okay to take a break or breaks whenever you feel the need. So no need to ask or state it in the chat. Feel free to just take a break if you need. So let's begin by playing a game, and we're going to explore the concept of identity by playing Guess Who. In a moment, I'm going to show you photos of 3 individuals. You'll also see identities linked to these individuals. Your job is to guess the identity of the individual in the photos from the choices on the screen. Put your answers in the chat using the letter that corresponds to your answer. Let's start with the first photo. Can you guess the correct identity of this individual? A, pediatric endocrinologist. B, CEO of a nonprofit. C, convicted felon. Again, in the chat, put what you believe to be the correct identity.
Looks like we're getting a lot of A's and B's.
Yep, can't tell. Oh, that was an interesting, can't tell.
Lots of A's and B's. And no idea.
All right.
Or all of the above. One person.
So let's try the second photo. So A, founder of an organization for differently abled individuals. B, professional dancer. And C, motivational speaker. So you've got a lot of C's. Some A's. All righty. Finally, can you guess this person's identity? Put your answers in the chat. A, actress. B, model. C, transgender woman. So we got some A's, some B's, some all of the above. No clue. B. All right. So let's go back. The correct answer is that Dr. Stanley Andrisse is all 3. Dr. Andrisse served 10 years in prison following his conviction as a young adult on federal drug charges. While in prison, His father passed away from diabetes, pardon me, and Dr. Andrisse was not permitted to attend his father's funeral. He decided that he would use his time in prison to study everything he could about diabetes and endocrinology. And one of his only allies on the outside world, a former teacher, sent him a few pages at a time due to restrictions about materials being sent to inmates, readings from medical journals. Upon his release, Dr. Andrisse applied to several colleges and universities and was rejected by all but one. He is now a practicing pediatric endocrinologist at Johns Hopkins, a professor at Howard University, and the founder of From Prison Cells to PhD, a nonprofit that assists formerly incarcerated individuals obtain advanced degrees. I actually met Dr. Andrisse at the National Child Support Enforcement Association Policy Forum back in January of 2018. As you might guess, the correct answer for Chelsea Hill is all three. At the age of 17, as a senior in high school, Chelsea was involved in a drunk driving accident which caused irreversible damage to her spinal cord, leaving her unable to walk and dance. Even though adapting to paralysis has altered every aspect of her life, most devastating was the impact the accident had on her dancing career. While recovering, she decided she would not submit to her disability and founded the Rolettes Wheelchair Dance Team. She's even appeared on the Ellen DeGeneres Show. And as you can guess, the correct answer is all three. Carmen Carrera is an American reality television personality, a model, a burlesque performer, and an actress. She's also a transgender woman and a transgender rights activist who's been active in AIDS awareness and activism. So as you saw in the Guess Who game, there's often more than meets the eye. Let's turn to the first goal of our training today, understanding the connection values have to identity and equity. Self-awareness is foundational for equity work. It involves understanding your personal identity, power structures, and values. So let's take a closer look at the concept of identity. One reason it may have been challenging to guess the identities of the three individuals in the Guess Who game is that our identity is a lot like an iceberg. Now, this diagram and this thought was developed by the Anti-Defamation League, from whom we have borrowed. Like icebergs, there is more to us than what we can see. We all have multiple identities that tend to become more visible and relevant depending on where we are. Only a small portion of our identity is actually visible to others or above the waterline, such as our clothing. Some of our identity is partially visible or at the waterline, such as our abilities or disabilities or our religion. But most of our identity is not visible. It is beneath the waterline. Think about it. Pardon me, your health, your education, your ethnic background, even your language. Just like the Guess Who game, we guess about other people's identities all the time. Pardon me. It's natural for our brains to put people in categories based on our own experiences, our biases, our values, and on our own identities. But like the iceberg, identity is deep and complex. So the more we challenge ourselves to go beneath what we see, beneath the iceberg, the more we can make connections with other people or even build empathy in places where we don't, at least at the surface, connect with others. So let's go a little deeper into the concept of identity and explore how identity relates to privilege and oppression. One factor that shapes our identity is privilege. Privilege, as defined by the YWCA of Greater Cleveland, refers to the unearned social, political, economic, and psychological benefits of membership in a group that has institutional and structural power. There are many types of privilege. We commonly hear about privilege because of race or gender, but privilege also exists for different groups based on religion, sexuality, ability, class, or education level. Identifying with multiple groups may lead to simultaneously experiencing privilege and oppression. Could anyone in the chat give me an example of that, where you might identify with multiple groups and feel privileged in one group but oppressed in another? If you could put two of those identities in the chat, that would be great. Yep, white gay male, absolutely. White woman, absolutely. Cisgender queer white woman. Oh my gosh, great answers, you guys. That is called intersectionality, a term coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw that refers to how race, class, gender, and other individual characteristics intersect and overlap with one another to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Intersectionality is a lens for exploring and understanding how our different identities and different forms of discrimination interact and affect a person. Privilege doesn't mean you've had an easy life or that you've never had to struggle. It just means that there are some things in your life you've never had to think about or worry about. As you saw in the video you watched called 5 Tips for Becoming an Ally, if you're straight, you don't have to think about getting fired because you're straight. Before you can fight for the rights of others, the woman in the video argues, you should understand what rights you have and others don't. Access to privilege doesn't determine your outcomes, but it can give you advantages in life. As Dr. Peggy McIntosh points out, privilege is like an invisible package of unearned assets, which people can count on cashing in each day, but about which they were meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, assurances, tools, maps, guides, codebooks, passports, visas, compasses, emergency gear, and blank checks. We're going to participate in an exercise next that will help you learn more about your identity and its relationship to privilege. So let's take out your equity journals or even a piece of paper if you brought that with you, and we'll do a journal exercise about power, privilege, and identity. The power flower is a visual representation of our social identities and the proximity those identities have to larger social identities that hold power and privilege in the United States. The activity will help you see where you belong in terms of various social identity groups and see your positions of privilege or disadvantage in each group. See how close or far we are to the dominant identities of our current society. The Power Flower exercise supports a deeper understanding of how our identities overlap and intersect, which in turn can help us become more sensitive to the way other people's identities intersect. And that overlap might cause us to feel closer to one another. So before you can go any further, please open your journal. Step 1. And again, as Sean was saying, do this large. You can even take up an entire sheet of paper. Make it large. To the best of your ability, draw this diagram of a power flower. Notice there is a circle in the middle. There are 8 circles surrounding the center circle, and there are 8 circles in the outer layer. So draw it large, 1 large circle in the center, 8 circles in the inner layer, and 8 circles in the outer layer. And after you've drawn the power flower, write the word me in the center circle, because the power flower is you. Step 2. You're going to label the outer petals with identity categories. So one petal should read economic status. Another one should read race. Use up all 8 identity categories in those outer petals using economic status, race, ability, gender, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, and religion. Now, don't worry, you're going to see all of these words on the next screen as well. Step 3, add the dominant identity to those outer petals. So in the same petal where you wrote the words economic status, add the words middle class, because that is the dominant identity in the United States of America under the category economic status. On the petal where you wrote race, in that same outer petal, write the word white. Follow all 8 categories and add the dominant identity to each of those outer petals. Under ability, it'll be able-bodied. Under gender, in the same petal, you'll write male as the dominant identity. Ethnicity is English speaking or European descent, whichever you choose. Age would be middle-aged. Sexual orientation, the dominant identity is straight. And in the category religion, the dominant religion in the United States is Christian. When you are done, and I'm going to leave this up here for a minute, but when you are done, take one of your colored pencils, just one of your colored pencils, and color in or shade very lightly all of the outer petals in the same color. So each outer petal with the words should be shaded the same color.
Marianne, somebody wants to know what are the age ranges for middle age?
You know, that's a very good question. In preparation for this, I did not look up middle-aged. I'm thinking that that's going to be more today. It would be more like millennials, say individuals in their 30s, perhaps also in their 40s. So it wouldn't include someone like me in her 60s, nor would it include someone like my youngest daughter in her 20s, but 30s, 40s, 50s, around there.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. So I'm hopeful I can move on to the next screen. Does that sound like if Sean, if you could let me know if people are putting yes in the chat. May I move on to the next screen, everyone?
You want to put yes if you're ready. Yeah, we're starting to
Wonderful.
see yeses.
Okay,
Yep.
sounds great. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. All right, now in the inner petals, identify yourself. So if you labeled an outer petal gender and then wrote the dominant male next to that on that outer petal, but if you're not a male and you identify in another way, put your own gender in the inner petal. Do this for all 8 inner petals. And when you're done, take your time, but when you're done, if your own identity, which is in the inner petal, matches the dominant outer petal, then use the same color that you used for the outer petal. Use that same color to shade the inner petal. If your own identity does not match the dominant outer petal, so as a woman, as a female, mine would not match the dominant gender category, you're going to use a different colored pencil to shade the inner petal whenever there's a mismatch. And then when you're done, look at the colors in your power flower. As you're finishing, I'm just going to provide some background. So kindly feel free to finish coloring and labeling your power flower. And as you're doing that, think about how many of your personal characteristics are different from the dominant identities. How will reflecting on your social identities help you understand others? We are all members of more than one community at the same time, and we can experience privilege and oppression simultaneously. For example, as a Jewish woman myself, I am conditionally white. I'm white until someone, like a protester in Charlottesburg, Virginia, decides I'm not. And then my white Jewishness becomes a threat. It's a very sobering experience. And I'm sorry, I said Charlottesburg, and I believe it was Charlottesville. When anti-Semitic protesters chanted, "Jews will not replace us," and when rioters at the Capitol on January 6th proudly wore t-shirts with slogans like 6MWE, which stands for 6 million weren't enough, I suddenly remember I too am a target of racists who have a blanket hatred of all minorities, and I am reminded of my intersectionality. When we see people only in terms of what's above the waterline, black, white, old, we lose sight of the powerful ways identities interact to create oppression and privilege. And by reflecting on how these multiple identities interact, and and reflecting on how these multiple identities interact in our own lives, we gain a better sense of ourselves and our relationship to power and how these factors influence our relationships with others. Identifying multiple forms of connection help us create policies, programs, and actions that can tackle multiple forms of discrimination. And for those of us who provide direct human services, understanding the fluid nature of our social identities helps us realize we may be connected to families we serve in deep and meaningful ways. And this in turn can help us become more empathetic and more compassionate. And I think I saw something in the chat that somebody wanted to notify me of. I'm not sure what that was, Sean. It just kind of um, went across my screen.
So Katie said that the exercise needs to be updated as baby boomer and Gen Y are the dominant age. The people that are traditionally considered middle age are minority age group and also considered the forgotten generation.
No kidding. Thank you so much. You know, I wondered about that as I was putting this together, and I thought, interestingly, while there, population wise, there are more baby boomers, thus the term baby boom, right? But
Yes.
that is very helpful to know, and I absolutely will update that. Thank you so much for the feedback.
Yeah, and I've got that typed into an email for you.
Excellent. Now we're going to turn to how values shape our identity. Values serve as our compass. They impact decisions we make about every aspect of our lives, professional decisions, relationship decisions, and decisions about our own personal behavior. Values define how we want to continue to live, whereas goals and vision focus on the outcome. Values focus on how we move toward those outcomes. Values are reflected in our behaviors, thoughts, and choices. What are your values? What do you believe matters most in life? Sometimes identifying your personal values is challenging. We might know what we don't like when we see it, but sometimes we can be hard pressed to articulate actual values we hold dear and close to our hearts. Some examples of values include freedom, respect, kindness, family, compassion, even education. Identifying your core values is the starting point for living an authentic life and sharing your beneath the water identities with others. The Department of Children and Families in Wisconsin values safety, economic security, equity, inclusion, children, and families. And some of us have even chosen to work there because those values align with our own. I mentioned that the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families, perhaps like the organization you work for, values equity. But what exactly is equity? Equality and equity both promote fairness. But as you can see from the picture, equality promotes fairness by treating everyone the same. Equity promotes fairness by giving individuals what they need to succeed. When the work we do upholds this value by building a more equitable world, we feel connected to a greater purpose, we feel that our work matters, and we feel empowered. But we can even go a step further. In the first image, it's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports because, after all, everyone's being treated equally. In the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. They're being treated equitably. But in the third image, all three can see the game without any extra supports or accommodations because the source or cause of the inequity was addressed. The systemic barrier has been removed, and that represents a step toward justice. We're going to turn now to those pre-class activities you received from Sean, including the Equity Journal activity on core values and the 3 short video clips, the Equity Challenge, What Kind of Asian Are You, and 5 Tips for Becoming an Ally. One of those pre-class activities was writing about your core values in your journal. In the chat, if anyone would like to share their answers to the questions posed in the assignment, I will have Sean identify those. Namely, what are your top 3 core values? Why are these values so important to you? And have you ever lost or sacrificed a core value in times of stress or when you've been triggered or felt threatened? So either please feel free to take yourself off of mute and respond to 1, 2, or 3 of these questions, or please feel free to share in the chat any of your answers to any of the questions. And Sean, if people read in the chat, or if they enter in the chat, if you could kindly read those.
You bet. So we have empathy, honesty, and stability from Stephanie Martinson, which is our first. I actually have family, honesty, and security for mine. We have compassion,
Great.
happiness, and balance.
Oh,
Integrity,
these are
fairness,
great.
and family. Yeah, are you seeing them then? Yeah, they're great.
Yes, I can only see them when they pop up one at a time.
Integrity, respect, and responsibility. Faith, integrity, and self-respect. I like this. Love, compassion, honesty.
Ooh, optimism.
Yes,
Would
that's a good one.
anyone like to share a time when they felt they were maybe compromising a value in times of stress, or maybe when you sacrificed a core value when you felt threatened?
And this one, you could come off of mute if you'd like to, rather than
Sure.
typing.
Hi, this is Alexia. I can go.
Hi,
Hi,
Alexia.
Alexia. Thank
Hey,
you.
sure, of course. Um, One of my values is compassion or empathy, and it's not. It's something that I've had to cultivate. It's something that I struggle with, and I find that it's easy for me to compassionate and to be compassionate or empathic when I'm not triggered or defensive or feeling attacked. But boy, when I get in my fight or flight mode, I find that I often sacrifice it and I don't mean to, and I often regret it afterwards. But that's something I have to work really hard at keeping front and center.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm so glad that you brought up the fight or flight because that leads us, that was wonderful, into a slide that will come up a couple of slides from here. Thank you so much for sharing. One of the first videos that you were asked to watch was the video on the equity challenge, and it might have made you feel uncomfortable. My hope is that as you watched the video, you were able to see the concept, now that we've learned about it, of the weightless knapsack of privilege, and perhaps even the concept of intersectionality as we've defined it. Oops, hold on. Yep, there we go. We mentioned the word triggers as we discussed the equity challenge video, and a trigger is something that jolts us out of the present and thrusts us into a place where we feel stress. Triggers are upsetting because they often impact our core values. Some people may even feel threatened by equity work and the national calls for economic and social justice. Perhaps you've even heard people say things like, I don't know, I just long for those good old days where we didn't have to think about stuff like this. Understanding that others' responses stem from the way their core values have been triggered helps us create effective strategies for persevering through equity work. Rather than freezing or flying away, we can stay in the fight and help others understand how equity work actually does promote values that they hold dear. So, what are your triggers? And how did those triggers impact you? Sometimes when your safety is threatened, you freeze. Sometimes you fly. Sometimes you just run away. So what are your triggers? Phrases or words, sounds, scents or fragrances, body language, physical contacts, environments. We won't have time to discuss them today, but being aware of them helps us understand their connection to our core values. Bias, goal number 2 for today is acknowledging the impact of bias on equity. And bias is a strong inclination of the mind or a preconceived opinion about something or someone. We all have biases, and they can impact our personal and professional lives, including such things as who we invite to meetings, whose advice we consider, how we advise others, even how we facilitate workshops. Coping with bias, especially in the workplace, can result in emotional labor. Emotional labor is the process of managing feelings and expressions to fulfill the emotional requirements of a job. More specifically, workers are expected to regulate their emotions during interactions with customers, coworkers, and superiors. One of the other videos you watched was What Kind of Asian Are You? I hope you found the video interesting. And although we won't have time today to discuss the emotional labor that the characters experienced, it might be interesting to consider that after the class. I'd like to move on now to goal number 3, exploring strategies for promoting equity. We'll explore strategies for communicating and disrupting bias, becoming an ally, strategies for self-care, and creating a personal action plan. So I'd like to demonstrate 6 simple communication strategies you can practice to respond to stereotypes, bias. Oops, let me go back here for a second. Stereotypes, bias, and prejudice. So I want you to imagine that you and I are over at our uncle's house. You know, that uncle who likes to tell jokes he thinks are funny, but which always end up being about some racial or ethnic group. He comes into the room we're in and in a big laughing voice says, "Boy, I'm sure glad it's going to rain today. Now I can give my car a Jewish car wash. You know, a Jewish car wash, one where I won't have to pay anything. I'll just wait until it rains, take my soap and sponge outside, and my car will get clean and I won't have to pay." Now, you and I know we want to say something, but we don't want to start an argument. So what do? We can use one of these six strategies. Assume good intent and explain impact. For example, "Uncle John, I'm sure you meant that to be funny, but that's not the impact it had. It actually hurt me." Ask a question. "What exactly did you mean by that?" Interrupt and redirect. "I'm going to interrupt you. Let's not even go there." Broaden to the universal behavior. "Uncle John, I think that saving money sort of applies to everyone." Make it individual. "Are you speaking of someone in particular you know?" And one that I've used often is simply saying, "Ouch." You can agree to disagree as well. And while this may not feel like the best way to disrupt bias, remember, you want to have a discussion, not an argument. You also watched a video. I'm going to skip through this since we're moving into the last 5 minutes of our presentation. You watched a video on 5 tips for becoming an ally. Those 5 tips were: understand your privilege, which we've looked at today; listen and do your homework, which we've also done; speak up, not over; realize that you'll make mistakes and apologize; and remember that ally is a verb. It is an act of being. Remember also to practice self-care and ask yourself questions like, what does self-care mean to me? What am I doing for self-care? What is my plan for self-care while I'm doing this important work? If any of these resonate with you, then congratulations, this is amazing. You're already practicing self-care. If you're not taking time for self-care as we move through what can be very taxing work, then some of those ideas might resonate with you. And finally, let's move to creating an action plan. I'm going to be sending you the PowerPoint, so rather than taking time in your journals today, to do this, which we normally do in our 4-hour class, I'm simply going to share this with you so that you can do this in your journals later. What you would do is, in your equity journal, identify at least one action you will commit to over the next week. And then in your journal, write down the corresponding prompt and finish it. So for example, if you choose action number 2, recognizing my privilege, then in your journal, you would write, "I will list the areas of my life where privilege exists, and I will use it to help someone by..." Now, of course, feel free to identify and work on each of these actions over the next several months. But for the next few weeks, identify one and then write the corresponding prompt and finish the prompt. So let's review what we've talked about today. We've discovered that identity is very deep and complex, and it shapes the way we see others, and that most of who a person really is lies beneath the water. We've learned that values act as compasses in our lives. We've learned that triggers can impact our values, and that each of us has a unique trigger response and can vary depending on where we are and who we're with. We've also learned that when we're confronted with bias, we often engage in heavy emotional labor, especially at work. We've explored 6 communication strategies for addressing bias. We reviewed the tips on becoming an ally. We underscored the importance of self-care. And we discuss creating an action plan. I hope that today, in our short time together, we've covered the goals that we set out to address. Understand the connection values have to identity and equity, acknowledge the impact of bias on equity, and explore strategies for promoting equity and equity work. I want to thank you so much for your participation today. As James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And again, we will be sending you this PowerPoint so that you can create your personal action plan and review some of the concepts. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me by phone or email. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Marianne. I know we just have a few minutes, but does anybody have any comments or questions that they would like to ask of Marianne before we end our conversation today?
Oh my
Marianne,
gosh, you're so welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
The Power
very
Flower
fast.
is amazing. And I really appreciate the feedback. I'm going to actually update the categories because I think, there aren't simply 8 categories of identity. So I'm going to update that. And I think I might take age out and just replace it. But if I leave it in, I'll definitely update it based on the feedback. Oh, thank you so much, everybody.
Great. And if anybody would like to volunteer to present at our August meeting, we are looking for presenters. So I will send that out in the email, but be thinking about that before you receive my email. And I'd love to have one of you volunteer to share. So I'm glad that you found that this was wonderful and helpful and beneficial. So thank you so much. Well, if we don't have any questions, then we'll end our time today. And again, don't forget to mark your calendars for August 13th, and we will see you then. And in the meantime, I'll also send out the email tomorrow with the link to the website so you can gather the information. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.